today's program on pruning fruit trees in the backyard, I'm not expecting anyone to leave the afternoon knowing what the how-tos of the exact of all of the different fruits that we grow in our backyard. But I want to provide you just some of the background work and certainly information terminology where you can go forward and kind of learn by doing with the fruits that you have currently in your backyard or plan on planting. So why do you prune? Well, for one, pruning will maintain a plant health. If you allow any type of plant to get out of control, particularly fruit trees, they tend to get diseased. So actually in the pruning process, you are removing some of these diseased woods, as well as you're keeping the plant young and vigorous. And the young wood is more disease tolerant, can withstand some of that pressure that they will come on in the 10 to 15-year-old tree. Also, pruning, we do this to encourage the balance, the overall balance of the tree. So it's structurally sound, as well as productivity. Old wood, it becomes unfruitful, as well as what fruit you get is smaller in size. So young wood is a very aggressive, very fruitful, and that's where you get your most quality of fruit. In quality, you're looking at the size and shape of the tree. Certainly, if you allow trees to get large on you, it calls for getting ladders out. That becomes a safety issue. Our backyard trees should not be any taller than what you can control by using loppers from standing on the ground. For our backyard trees, we should never be getting on ladders to do any harvesting or pruning. Certainly, I mentioned this already, that pruning encourages quality of fruit produced, as well as maximizing the yield. Many folks are hesitant to prune because they think they're pruning off a lot of the coming year's fruit. But in reality, what's ending up is the fruit is of larger in size, as well as they come off. What I mean by come off, the harvest is in a shorter window during harvest season. It's not prolonged. Quantity, you may not be harvesting more in numbers, but they are certainly larger. So you are actually harvesting more in quantity as well. So, pruning is a kind of a balancing act. The objective is to have enough vegetation to support fruit growth, but if you allow too much vegetation, you actually end up with less fruit. So it's a balancing act between having enough vegetative growth that will support the fruit that you're wanting to eventually harvest. Pruning is an art and science. And for many of you, you've had some art classes, and art is different for everyone. So pruning styles are very different from my backyard to possibly your backyard. So there is an art to pruning, but science is a big picture of why we prune. For you, and that's what you need to understand today, is why are you pruning? What are the reactions of why, of these cuts you're making? What's going to happen? So understanding the why, then you can let your artsy come out and still have an excellent fruit crop. So again, it's a balancing act between you like to be in here where you're doing these right things in the art side, as well as making pruning cuts for the purpose of structure and plant health, as well as, again, to make those right cuts at the right places. And as you see the diagram here, there's a cut here. Which way is the bud facing? The bud's right here. So expect that bud to grow that direction. And you notice that the bud cut is made like a 1/4 inch above the bud at somewhat of a slant. So the art of pruning, I've taken examples here. Here, this particular backyard gardener was making cuts, forcing all buds, the uppermost bud was facing inward. So you can see the results of all the growth went towards the center of the tree. That's not characteristic to what we would want. Most typically, we want more spreading and open. So this particular backyard gardener was making cuts where the uppermost bud was an outward facing bud. So the end result is more of a spreading type. So let's look at some additional objectives of pruning. Proper pruning, you will develop a very strong, structured tree. You need to allow openness in the tree. You need light to penetrate to the inside. I've heard the saying, if you have pruned properly if a bird can fly through the tree without lighting. It just sails right on through. That tells me you've removed enough wood, yet there's enough foliage there, but it's still open enough for good light penetration to get on the inside of the tree. And that does several things. It allows some fruit production further into the tree versus on the very outside, as well as reduction of disease issues throughout the tree. You get good air circulation, good light penetration, less disease issues. Also, pruning objective is to control the size. Again, you don't need to be getting on a step ladder and fall and break some bones. So stay on the ground, keeping that tree down at the level that you can do some pruning just right above your head. Another objective is to remove damaged wood. This would be either winter damage, wind, ice, that kind of damage can be removed. That's one of the first things that you will look for when you start your yearly pruning. Certainly, pruning is a dwarfing process. Keeps the trees down to your eye level or lower. But again, it encourages a greater size of fruit, color, and quantity. So when should you prune? That's a question we get at the Extension office quite often, and our answers can vary depending on what our art side is telling us, but we do know what the science side is telling us. And the science side is telling us to prune late winter. Now, if I had 20 apple trees in my backyard, I cannot wait till late winter because I don't have enough time to prune before they start flowering. So I would have to prune starting maybe midwinter and up to the point of flower bud. I showed a similar picture a while ago, but illustrating where to make cuts. This cut right here is too far away from the bud. It needs to be closer to the bud. This piece of wood, if left in this place, this is wood that's going to be dying. So in the process of decay, some disease organisms can hold up into it, and then decay can go further down into the tree. So make the cuts close to buds, 1/4 inch. At the time of late winter pruning, that is the time when food reserves start to go up into from the tree trunk, from the root tree trunk into the buds, and that's when the cells of the tissues at the very growthy areas are starting to divide. So those late winter prunings, you can have the wounds will heal rather quickly because the cells are much more active at that time and will close off that open wound. As well, during the late winter, at the late winter, the leaves are not out yet, so you can see the structure of the tree, see what you have. You can see what the limbs have been damaged from winter or ice, so those can be easily removed. But then you also can see the balance of the tree, where you might need to bring more limbs further back to create that balance in that tree. As well as that time, the bark itself tears less, so you will actually do less damage at that time. Particularly if, as most of you, your pruners do need sharpening more often than I have the time to do so. If you are caught in having to do some early winter pruning, those pruning cuts are going to be open for some dieback from a very harsh winter. So you can see some winter injury from early winter pruning, particularly to peaches and the other stone fruits. You're not going to see that much damage on apples. You can see some damage on pears if you do some early winter pruning. But winter is not the only time you can prune. It is suggested to do summer pruning, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but summer pruning is more dwarfing. So the response is summer pruning, you'll have less of a flush of growth versus the winter pruning, you get a large burst of growth. So summer pruning is a practice that we do need to employ on our backyard fruits. Before I get further into pruning, let me just throw some words at everybody so we are on the same page of understanding when I use some terms. I won't go through these rather quickly, but this will give you kind of the concept of things we'll be talking about. A bearing tree, one that is of age to be fruiting and fruiting annually. So a bearing tree. A branch is a mature shoot. A branch is typically wood that you will keep from year to year. It's not something that you'll be removing unless it was damaged. So it's a mature shoot. The bud, it's either a fruiting bud, as other people call it, a flowering bud, or it is a vegetative bud, a bud that will only develop leaves and more growth. So you have two types of buds, a fruiting bud and a vegetative bud. I want to talk a lot about crotches, particularly the crotch angle, the angulation that we do need to strive for creating a good, strong structure of a tree. Fruiting spurs. Many of our tree fruits start developing small, short spurs, and year after year, that's where the fruit will be, the fruiting buds will be developed, and the spur growth could be very minimal, quarter inch possibly, or maybe a half inch to an inch in length per year. So occasionally you will have to remove fruiting spurs, but typically this is what when you're pruning, you're going to leave as many fruiting spurs as you can. Heading back. Heading back is a term used when you try to shrink a tree. It's grown too far out or the top has really gotten up there, so you're going to head it back. So you're removing a portion of the terminal, either the central terminal or the side branch terminals. Thinning out. Thinning out is a term we use when we remove a branch totally back to its origin. And we're not going to leave any buds there. We do not want it to come back. So we are thinning it out, removing it. The leader, that's typically the term we use for the central portion of the tree. It's a central leader or it's a major branch. Scaffold branch is the term we use on several of our fruits, including some vining fruits like grapes. Scaffold branch is a branch that comes off of the main leader. Some people call those a tree trunk that is maintained from year to year. And you will have side branches that are fruiting branches coming off the scaffold. And those are the secondary branches that will be carrying the fruit. And a shoot is current season's growth. Once the shoot is more than a year old, is either going to be a secondary branch or will develop into a branch. So when we use the term shoot, it is the current year growth that we're talking about removing. And a sucker is a fast growing current season wood. A sucker most commonly associated with backyard fruit production is suckers from the base, from below the graft. But suckers can occur particularly in pairs, where you can have suckers occur from any of the major scaffolds or out the top that do need to be removed, most typically back to their origin. So quickly, I just want to show this diagram to somewhat refresh the terminology here. This could be any type of tree. Looks very much like maybe an apple or a pecan here. So this would be the main leader or trunk, as one would call it. And then the first limb at a great angle. This is a great crotch angle. Anything greater than 60 degrees. It's not at a 90 degree. It's more of this one maybe at a 75-degree angle. Great crotch angle. But these are the primary scaffolds. So this is one, this is a second, this is a third, and so on up. And then off the primary scaffold, we have the secondary scaffolds. This is where the fruit will be carried. Occasionally, you will have some spurs develop further back onto some primary scaffolds, and that is just fine. That's more areas for fruit to develop, particularly if it's nice and open, and you can allow that to occur. Then you have the spurs. That is where the short growths occur every year, and this is where the fruiting buds would be located. So when you're doing any major pruning cuts, you need to look for where these fruiting spurs are and not remove every single spur, or you're not going to have any fruit the coming season. I think we'll go on now. You do need to be armored with the appropriate tool. These three tools right here are your basics. If you have less, you're really not going to be able to do proper pruning techniques. You can certainly have more than just this. This is all hand equipment. Probably the most often one used is the hand pruner. If you're doing a great pruning job from the date you plant, this is probably all you will ever need, just the small hand pruners. The pruning saws will come into play when you're needing to remove some major scaffolds, possibly has some winter injury, and that's where the pruning saw will come in. And then the loppers are definitely a necessary tool to remove those larger suckers or doing some heading back or some terminal cuts. Pruning versus training. I think y'all understand what pruning is. You're removing wood. Training is not removing wood. Training is forcing the tree by you selecting what buds you leave to make it grow that direction that you want it to go. But training does involve pruning, because you're going to make those appropriate cuts right above a bud in the direction you want that limb to go. Limb spreaders. In order to get the proper crotch angle for where the scaffold is attached to the main trunk, you need some spreaders. And this is one technique that home gardeners can use, definitely used by our commercial folks. You need to spread those limbs when they're young. The first growing season or two, this is when limb spreaders are used. Also in the backyard, you can use weights. You'll weight down a limb to create that larger crotch angle. Trees, apples, pears, peaches, they tend to have a very narrow crotch angle if you not allow them to grow naturally. So we need to spread them apart. And the younger they are in that spread, that's when you need to do it. If you wait too long, it's all over. Then trunk supports, if you put it in trunk supports at all, they should not be in place for but a year. The spreaders that you're using, the limb weights and spreaders, they should only be in place a year as well. But you need to constantly put them back, especially the first 3 to 4 years. you're needing to reconfigure every winter where your spreaders are going to be or your weights. Growth form. Central leader. We have one leader going up in the center of the tree, and that's for apples and pears. Apples lend themselves very readily to this. Pears are your misbehaviors. They are very aggressive growers, and quite often pears we just let go. That's what I see in backyards because they require so much removal. They produce so much wood. And if you don't have time to prune, maybe that's what you're going to do with your pear, because they do need summer pruning to keep them in bounds. So central leader, now we'll talk about these in more detail in a little bit. Modified central leader is where we start off having a central leader, but then when we get up to maybe the 4 to 5 foot range, we're going to allow whatever to take over. And it will be somewhat of a rounded top to it. And I'll show some examples in a few minutes. And this can be done with plums and cherries. But then we have the open center. This is employed with for peaches and nectarines. This oftentimes when I go to backyard to assist in pruning, I find that this open center style is used for apples and pears alike. You shouldn't. You will get more production from apples and pears if you use the central leader type of growth form versus the open center. Here's just a graphic showing what we just mentioned. This is a central leader type going straight up and having the major scaffolds come off. Here's the modified leader. To this point, we decided we're not going to maintain a central leader and allow several to go off. So it kind of gives you the rounded cap look. In the open center, we'll have possibly 3 scaffolds chosen, and the center is always kept open, so you get good air movement through, good circulation, as well as makes harvesting pretty easy. So let's talk a little bit more in depth on central leader. The apple tree on the right is nice. Have we seen this in the backyard? Yes, there's some master gardeners who are maintaining their apple trees like such, but that's not the norm. But if you want production, if you want quality, this is what you're striving for. So it's always good to see what you want, and then you have some vision to create your artistic end to get to this point. So the central trunk with scaffolds, the scaffolds themselves are 60 to 80 degrees off the crotch angles off the main trunk. Why do we need that? Well, for several reasons. It creates openness, creates layers within, and this is where you might say the birds can fly straight through. Also, there's a scientific reason why you need this angulation. At this angle versus a 45 or 30 degree angle, at a greater than 60, you will have some hormones develop that cause early fruiting. So trees that are maintained or established with scaffolds that radiate off the central leader at a 60 degree or greater, you will have fruit sooner than allowing everything to go somewhat straight up. Besides having the limbs not at the same place throughout up the tree, you would need to symmetrically locate limbs, choose the ones you're leaving that create symmetry if you look from top down at it. So it's kind of, you don't have one stacking on top of each other. They're somewhat off from each other. Again, allowing good air circulation as well as good light penetration. So you want that good balance. You need to allow spacing between the scaffolds from one to up the trunk, at least 6 to 10 inches apart. Again, they're not going to be stacked on top of each other. They're going to be offset. Well, here's a central leader. I'm going to go through the first, second, and third year of what the pruning process is. But again, I think you need to see what the goal here is. To have a tree that is structurally sound, that can hold fruit weight. If we had a very narrow crotch angle, the engineering of where it's connected to the tree is very weak. Greater crotch angle, the engineering is really designed, it's attached to the main trunk in a manner where it can hold quite a bit of weight and not break off. So here we have a very common apple tree that was planted. This is possibly maybe a 3-year-old, 2-year-old tree. Ideally, the younger, the better as a homeowner to purchase. If you're buying a 3, 4, 5-year-old tree, you've already you're wasting possibly your time because that's all. At that point, the tree has already established its scaffolds in the place of where, excuse the scaffolds are on the tree, and the crotch angles have already been established. So what we recommend is remove all these limbs. Take the pruners and remove them because most likely the crotch angle is wrong. So start from scratch. That's why we say start with a young tree. In that first growing season, as it's growing, you're going to rub off any unwanted ones. You're going to look to keep 3 to 4 of these lateral branches that first growing season. You don't want them close to the ground. You want them maybe 30 inches off the ground, the first one. So your first lateral is going to be quite low, but again, with apples, maybe 30 inches. With peaches, it's going to be lower. It could be as low as 15, 18 inches. So you remove all branches and cut the tree to 30 inches in height, and that will force some lateral growth. As well as there's going to be some upper buds that will grow and compete to be the central leader. There's going to be more than one, but that first winter, you're going to narrow it down to 1. So summer prune and train the selected branches you want to become your future scaffolds. You use that by not using those spreaders, but using small things like toothpicks to separate, to create that angle when they're just emerging, as well as using clothespins to create that spread. So you've allowed it to grow that first season. You've selected a few of the scaffolds for future use, but that first dormant season, you need to thin out into the weak limbs by just removing them back to their origin. You want openness. You're going to select the vigorous central leader. You still need a central leader. Remember, you cut it off, but there's going to be so many taken off to want to be in competing. You need one. Select the one that is more center and possibly the strongest. Yes, you'll have a dog leg there for a while, but that's okay. It will somewhat appear to straighten out. And keep those scaffolds that have that good 60 degrees or greater crotch angle. And of those that are at least 6 inches apart up and down the main trunk and not on top of each other. So the first scaffold you're going to keep is anywhere from 18 to 24 inches above ground level. So at this point, you're making a decision that you're going to have fruit low because you don't want to get up on the step ladder. So your initial scaffolds are going to be low, right where you are having to bend down to possibly pick fruit off the lowest limbs. Then you need to prune that central leader that you've chosen, that one. You need to prune it back where it is 18 to 24 inches above the top first scaffold that you decided to keep. You need that separation because you need the central leader to continue being the central leader. You don't want the competition of a scaffold in the way. So you need to prune it back not any more than 18 to 24 inches above the top scaffold. And also the scaffolds need to be pruned back, the uppermost one to 6 to 12 inches in length, so you do not again have that competition. So the second growing season, your magic is about to happen. During the second growing season, during summer, you're going to remove any undesirable shoots. Maybe some suckers are growing rather quickly. They don't need to be there, so you're going to remove them. You're going to continue putting limb spreaders in there. to get that crotch angle going on those possibly on the scaffolds you kept. They need to be spread a little bit more, and certainly the new ones that will be coming on. Again, you can tie the scaffolds to some stakes to the ground, but that becomes a trip hazard, as well as you need to mow around them. So I opt most typically not to use stakes, but weights do work well. So the second dormant season, you have a tree that's beginning to take shape. This possibly was where you had it grow the first season. So second season, it grew quite a bit, and you're going to select some scaffolds, but you're again going to cut back some of these scaffolds to keep them in bounds, to keep it compact, and again, to not compete with the center leader. So again, right on top, you see that there was two that decided they were going to be the central leader. You need to remove one. So you might have three that took off. You need to choose one and remove all others. You're going to select some additional leaders. Not leaders, scaffolds that developed this past summer. And then you're going to look at past scaffolds and prune them back. And what you're going to end up with is more of almost a Christmas tree type look to it the first few years, because you don't want any scaffolds to outgrow any others. They need to be kept in bounds. You don't want any scaffold to be shading a scaffold below it. They all need to be exposed to receive as much sun as possible. The 2-year-old scaffolds will start having side shoots, and those are the secondary shoots or the secondary scaffolds, and you need to reduce the number of them. You don't want them to get too aggressive, so reduce those down to 2 to 4 per major scaffold. Then the central leader is then cut back as well to keep it within the scope, the size of the entire tree, and balance it out by stepping back and making that balance. So you might be cutting back some scaffolds more so than others to keep that balance. Again, do not allow any lower branches to outgrow anything above it. And do not allow one to shade the other. So the dormant pruning for that third growing season, in the two drawings, you can see one that's been designed. You've selected the scaffolds appropriately. We see it's been symmetrically aligned, and certainly the up and down, there'll be some spacing, whereas this is very little pruning was done, and you do not have the openness. There's been too many scaffolds allowed, too much wood. You need it open. So after the end of the third winter, you're going to repeat what you did the second winter on the pruning. You're going to be continuing to build on the framework. You're going to select new scaffolds and scale back the 3-year-old scaffolds and the 2-year-old scaffolds. You'll scale them back and select 2 or 3 new ones, and keep that central leader being the dominant leader. You do not, at this point, they're 3 years old. You're wanting some fruit that next year. So do not remove all the fruiting spurs. So you're going to allow it to fruit. So this is a schematic drawing of that first year. I want you to cut it back to nothing. We're maybe 30 inches of growth here. And that first growing season, you will see limbs popping out, new growth popping out all over the place. So that second winter, you will be making some heading back cuts. You definitely will have more than just one central leader, but reduce the central leader, then reduce, head back that central leader, as well as the scaffolds the 3 scaffolds that you have chosen. Then third year, certainly more substantial in size, but you're going to head back those scaffolds, keep them compact, keep them in bounds, as well as continue to working on the top. At some point, this could be the height you want it, the third year. You might say, I'm 6.5 foot tall, and I can reach further than my 5 foot wife. So you're going to allow it to grow a little bit more that fourth year, maybe put on 2 or 3 more scaffolds, and then you call it quits. So then once you've decided how tall you want it, every winter thereafter, you're going to not allow anything grow higher than this point. So even your central leader will be terminated and everything will be growing outward. So anything going up needs to be removed, either during the summer, doing some removals, or the winter. So just to recap, that central leader, ideal look for a backyard apple tree. You will want to maintain this type of framework. So you will be reducing a lot of new growth, but this along the scaffolds is where your fruit is going to be. It's not going to be out here where you're making a lot of removal cuts. You want good light penetration. You want good air movement, less disease issues when you have this, good fruit quality. The tree will be somewhat of a cone shape. The upper scaffolds will never be as wide growing out as the lower scaffold, so it's somewhat of a cone shape. And mentioned this already, your priority is maintaining those spurs, those fruiting spurs on the fruiting wood. So thin out all that undesirable growth. That's hard to do, but it has to be done to maintain good health for the long term of a tree's life. And continue heading back that central leader. Don't ever allow it to get any taller, because by nature, they want to get tall. Even though you say you planted a dwarf tree, a dwarf apple tree will still get 30+ foot tall. So don't think because you bought a dwarf, it's going to stay in that 10-foot range. It will not. It will get tall. Here's this schematic here. Here's a tree that you planted. You make some choices. The top is you make wise choices. The bottom, let me concentrate on the bottom. The homeowner said, I paid good money for this. I'm not going to do some, I'm going to keep some of this stuff. Well, they kept these 3 that were somewhat going up because they thought they wanted a tree that's more up and growing, and then they're going to allow and keep branches that will come off. Well, year 2, yes, they did some pruning, some heading back cuts. Year 3, look at the crotch angles here. This is asking for disaster. This, in a heavy ice, heavy wind, this can break over. Heavy crop load, this can break. When you have these type of crotch angles, that's not going to happen. It can carry that tree crop load. It can stand up in ice. Yes, it'll bend somewhat in ice, but it's engineered so that it can bend a lot. Now let's go to the open center, the type that we need to employ for growing peaches and nectarines. Just schematics rather quickly. The first year you prune it back very similarly as we did with the apples and pears. And just a schematic of what you're wanting to eventually have. Eventually you want possibly 3 or 4 scaffolds. No central leader, 3 or 4 scaffolds. So your scaffold is history, gone by the 2nd year. Your central leader is. So oftentimes it's called the inverted umbrella because you have an open center. Everything's kind of upside down umbrella. Everything grows out and up. So the system you will want to select 3 to 5 well-spaced scaffolds. So they're not on top of each other and they're not opposite of each other from that trunk. They're somewhat offset in both up and visually looking down from top. So let's look at the year 1 planting. First year, you do major removal because any peach you purchase, the wood, all the limbs are so far up that you want your peach tree low so you can spray, so you can harvest. If you allow the first scaffolds to be in that 3-foot range, where this is showing here, that's too high because everything's going to be up here and we have all this wasted space. Let's bring it down, have the scaffold starting low because we want them spreading. So the first year you're going to select the desired scaffolds that first summer, so you'll be removing a lot of new growth and using toothpicks and clothespins to spread those limbs, those new twigs, so you get that right crotch angle. And pinch any unwanted new shoots back to its origin before they get too woody. And once they reach 8 inches in length, they're going to start creating a lot of lignin in the stem, and pruning it makes pruning less easier if you do it before they get substantial in size. So that dormant first year pruning, you've done a little pinching during the summer, removing a lot of unnecessary growth, and we've gotten rid of that central leader, and that first year you selected possibly more than 3 scaffolds, but in this case we selected down to 3, remove some of the lower shoots that have occurred, and yes, that will happen. You do need to remove all those low ones. This bottom one is maybe 15 to 18 inches off the ground. Yes, you can go a little higher, but why when you want that fruit to be low so you can harvest right at head height. You do want to remove any of the limbs, particularly in the first few years. The peach tree does want to go up. Remove any limbs that are wanting to go straight up or somewhat near that upright growth. And encourage the scaffolds that you chose that first year. Encourage growing outward. Well, how do you do that? Well, when you make those heading back cuts from that terminal, from the tip of the scaffold, you would choose to leave a downward facing bud. And when that bud's going to be the dominant bud. When it breaks, it's going to make a dip down and go up and out. If you made your cut right where there's a upward facing bud, the propensity of that bud is to grow more straight or more upright. So that you always make your last cut with a downward facing bud in choosing to keep that open center going. So the second year of pruning, the dormant period, we've removed all this center stuff. Yes, you'll have a lot of upright growth happening. So you need to remove all this in the center, and then head back. And this is where you will make your heading back cut, and this will be an outward facing bud right here. If it were an inward facing bud, again, it would grow this way. You want it to grow this way. This is the art meeting science. Continue promoting the current scaffolds you have. Down in the center, down here close to the trunk on the major scaffold, you're going to leave some of this twiggy growth. In year 3, you can allow some of this twiggy growth down here on some major scaffolds, and maybe even right in here. Don't put it all the way back, but allow some growth here that's not overpowering, but they will fruit. So at year 3, you can allow your tree to go ahead and fruit and get them to, so you can enjoy some of your work at some point there. So head back the growth of the central leader to, the center to 12 to 18 inches, that very center, to keep some of those productive wood right in the center. And year after year, that's how you're going to maintain that center. You never allow the center to become any major limb. You're going to keep it open. Again, you'll have some leaves and some fruit in here, but you don't want anything to going up. This is your scaffolds. This is the openness you want. Okay, open center of the 3rd year and beyond. So by year 3, 3rd winter, you should have your 3 scaffolds, 3 to 5 scaffolds, well chosen, well developed, great crotch angles. Continue removing these forceful upright growth that might come from the center. They eventually will quit, where you can have some short stubby growth in the center. and allowing some growth along the major scaffolds for fruit to occur. This is where the loppers come in hand, because at this point you're going to be 6 foot or more in height, eventually possibly just 8 foot, and that is it. Every year this is going to be 8 foot for some. Some of you it's going to be less, maybe it's 6 foot. Don't get on a ladder. You can maintain that center by pruning it back heavily. So a quick overview of what we just did. Year 1, starting off with a new planting, cutting it back, choosing scaffolds, opening it up, never allowing the central leader to take off again, keeping it open, keeping it open. And yes, the schematics looked like it's a little taller, but this is only 28 inches off the ground at this point. First limbs, again, 15 to 18 inches is not bad for your first scaffold. All right, I'm going to move right on into pruning and training small fruits. The small fruits I want to address are blackberries, blueberries, raspberries, grapes, and the native grape, the muscadine. Let's talk about blackberries. This morning you heard about producing blackberries. I want to talk about pruning blackberries. Primocane fruiting blackberries are a different story, but the first year growth on blackberries, that wood we call a primocane. Once it goes through a dormant period, the winter months, that primocane is ready to fruit. And at that point, we call that the floricane. And that's where we would be harvesting the fruit. Now, do realize there's primocane producing blackberries that come up on the picture just a few years now. But for the most part, what we're finding is that you all are still growing the floricane producing blackberries, the blackberries that produce a year after the initial growth. So upright blackberries, there are trailing blackberries. I will talk about them in a few minutes. But on pruning upright blackberries, the first growing season, you'll have canes coming. Particularly if it's a mature 3 or 4 year old plant, it will want to grow up in more than one shoot. At some point during the growing season, you need to top them. Maybe 5 foot is your choice. If you are shorter and you want your fruit more eye level, maybe 4 foot is your choice. But wherever you top them, you will initiate any buds below that, you will initiate a lateral growth. And this is where the fruit will be occurring next year. So you want to encourage a lot of lateral growth, and those could be weeping down, they could get in your way, but you can do some summer pruning on these lateral growths to maintain them in the space that you have. But that winter, you need to cut back these lateral growths to 12 to 18 inches away from the major cane. So yes, they will fruit all the way out to the very tip, but if you allow one of these lateral canes to attempt to produce all these to fruition, to ripening, you will get uneven ripening, you will get kind of tart, sour. You just will not get the quality. The quality blackberries are harvested when you cut back these laterals to 12 to 18 inches in length. And that is hurting for some of you all, but that's what needs to be done. Also, during the winter, if it was not done immediately after harvest, you do need to remove any of the previous season's floricanes that have fruited. They naturally die, and they do need to remove. You need to clean that up. And that is a winter chore if you had not done it during the growing season. Moving on to trailing blackberries. They require a trellis system, preferably with 2 wires. The first wire at 30 inches off the ground, and then up another 24 inches, you will have your second wire. This is for your trailing blackberries. The floricanes is what you have on the trellis. Once floricanes start to flower, start blooming, you will have basal growth here these will be the promocanes, and they're going to start running around on the ground. Leave them on the ground, maybe prop them up if they're, and move them if they're in the way. But once harvest is complete on these, on the floor canes or up on the cane, you will remove them. You will chop them off at the ground level and pick up any of these promocanes that have developed since spring. You will pick them up and tie them to the wires. So it is a little tedious work, but I know a lot of folks do enjoy eating blackberry varieties of the trailing type. A little bit different in flavor. Blueberries. I love blueberries. One of my favorite fruits. Blueberries are quite unique. They're during the dormant season, you can visually see what are flower buds. They're nice and fat and swollen. And what are leaf buds? Leaf buds are very small, but you can tell that's a bud. But definitely you can tell what are flower buds. So when you do the winter pruning, you need to know how much of the flower buds you actually are removing. So winter prune, each year you want to cut out old canes. You do want to have more of an openness to it because they get really thick and leafy in there. So you will not allow any cane that's developed to get older than 5 years. Once canes are 5 years or older, they become less productive. The fruit, they will produce a lot of flowers, but the fruit will be much smaller. So keep the bush young by removing anything that's 5 years or older, as well as some of the more twiggy growth is removed. So from the schematic, you can see that some of the twigginess was removed, open it up, as well as removing some of the old canes. Thinning out some of the centers, not necessarily an open center, but keeping a good air movement through. An interesting point about blueberries is that it is a native crop to the United States and in North America. It's a native pollinator, since honeybees are not native to the United States. Its native pollinator is the bumblebee. The bumblebee's structured mouth part is where it can almost stick its entire head into the opening and has a long tongue, whereas the honeybee is challenged to get this done. Let's talk about upright raspberries. These are raspberries that do not necessarily require a trellis, but it's nice to have a trellis because they can get so much fruit load on that they will start bending and falling over. So the picture shows a upright raspberry before pruning. The structure in place is approximately 3 foot tall, so you can see some of this growth is about 6 foot. The schematic on the left is showing to remove canes to the ground. The weak, thin canes can be removed. You need to thin them out. They're too productive vegetatively, so you need to remove and open up so they're not as crowded. Also, the trellis system is a little different than what the real picture shows. It's kind of the V design, which is a good design to use as for upright blackberries. Sometimes they get so heavy that this design works very well for upright blackberries as well. In the picture, we see the variety heritage. So winter thinning out the older and less vigorous canes, and 3 to 5 canes per linear foot. Trailing raspberries can be a nightmare. They love to grow and go everywhere. They must be trellised. Probably the variety that's most often grown is Dorman Red. Ideally, a trellis system that has at least 3 wires, approximately 5 foot off the ground, the uppermost wire, and stagger them down. Wrap and tie the canes to the trellis. You have to tie them, or they will slither off through wind. New canes develop, and you need to thin them out. Don't allow all of them to stay. Keep the most vigorous one, thin to 3 to 4 plants per foot, or 3 to 4 canes per foot. You can prune Dorman Red early February. Cut the long canes back to 6 to 8 foot. Gosh, they will grow 12, 14 foot in length. but cut them back to 6 to 8 foot to create good quality berries. Yes, they will tend to fruit all the way out to the furthest point, as well as peg down and make more plants. And that's where they can get very invasive if you do not pick them up and put them on the trellis during the growing season. Black raspberries, they do not require trellis. They're more of your upright, but would also benefit to have more of an upright trellis system, similar to the red raspberry. They can be summer tip, very similar to blackberries at the height that you want them, and then the laterals are tipped back very similarly as the blackberries to get the production to the level that you'd want. Grapes, grapes and muscadines left. Grapes, I'm not going to talk much about grape trellising because grapes is an art. It's an art that is specific to some varieties, but so I'm going to talk more about the generality. Yes, grapes require trellis, the top wire at least 5 foot off the ground. Most typically what I see in the backyard are not structurally sound but carry weight. It needs to be a strong trellis system, and the top wire at least 5 foot off the ground. Let me talk about the terminology a little bit. Certainly the major limb up to the wire is the trunk, and then we have the laterals we call cordons. Cordons are going to be kept in place year after year, or at some point they may need to be replaced, but the fruit will be coming off of past year's canes. So these canes grew the previous season, as you see the crop load here. So we have cordons and we have spurs, very similar terminology as for the fruit trees, and canes and suckers coming from the base. So the trellis system, what we'll be doing with a 2-arm trellis, most typically I'll see 4 arms for a backyard garden. This one is trained with 10-foot cordons. With a 4-arm, you can do 8 foot to 8 foot. But the key is to select and leave only 40 vegetative productive buds per plant. That's kind of a key thing. You will be removing a lot of cane growth, recognizing what is current year by a cinnamon color, and the past year, immediate past, is more of a darker, almost a grayish color, but more of a cinnamon color. And you may leave up to 3 buds per cut back, but count up. You're going to leave 20 buds along here, 20 buds along here, 40. There are some varieties that are less aggressive, and you need to remove more, meaning leave less buds. And then there are some varieties that require more, leaving more, and it really depends on what the objective of this grape is. Is it a wine grape? Is it a table grape? Or is it a juice grape? And they all have their specifics. So you need to do some research for the type of grape that you're trying to grow. Quickly, muscadines. I love muscadines. I'm a native Arkansan, growing up eating muscadines. They're great. Muscadines train very similarly as grapes, but you will be extremely aggressive in pruning back. The fruiting spurs, you will aggressively prune it back. Expansive growth, much more than what the picture shows, but you'll aggressively prune it back to spurs every winter, leaving possibly 1 fruiting bud per cut back. So it's a very aggressive pruning. Thank you for your attention. I believe some of you possibly have sent in questions, which we will be answering those by email. Thank you.